Hey everyone, it's Amit. So the CDC imposed eviction moratorium effectively lapsed on July 31st, 2021. And this is after the Supreme Court basically had a ruling in June of 2021, which effectively said that the CDC eviction moratorium was in fact unconstitutional and barring any level of Congress-related action, i.e. a new law basically, or a new legislation being put into place, this thing should, for all intents and purposes, lapse come July 31st, 2021. Now, there was a significant amount of pressure faced by the White House as well as Congress and, of course, the CDC as well, leading up to this July 31st, 2021 date, because people were very concerned that there was going to be a significant spike in the number of evictions in the month of August, primarily driven by the fact that a lot of the federal money that was allocated for back rent of almost $47 billion that had been distributed to the states had not made their way down to the tenants as well as the landlords. And the other obviously compelling factor associated with an extension of this particular eviction moratorium was, of course, the Delta variant, as it continues to gain more and more steam in the United States as well as the globe for that matter. The White House basically asked Congress to go ahead and figure this whole thing out, come up with some level of legislation, and perhaps to no surprise for anybody that is viewing this video, or for that matter anybody else in the United States, Congress basically failed to act. They failed to come out with any form of legislation, and after that the finger pointing basically started. You got several high-ranking senators that basically started pointing blame to the CDC and effectively said that, hey, the CDC should basically have extended the eviction moratorium, and it was not basically an issue or something that Congress needed to effectively work on, because Congress was, of course, going to head off on summer break anyway at that point in time. And note here, in the beginning part of this video, I already said that the Supreme Court effectively ruled the CDC eviction moratorium to be unconstitutional. So for the CDC to effectively hold the buck in terms of carrying this thing forward was basically completely out of the realm or out of its domain. But of course, this is what happens when Congress effectively fails to act on anything. Now, with that said, several high-ranking congressmen and women for that matter did take that symbolic stance of basically spending a night out at the steps of the Capitol for all intents and purposes to basically show their support towards the homeless, because there's supposed to be a significant spike in the number of homeless people should this whole eviction process basically occur. Feeling the enormity of the pressure from all these senators for all intents and purposes, as well as the CDC, as well as lots and lots of people that are going to be impacted by this whole eviction moratorium potentially getting lifted, the White House felt the enormity of the pressure, and our president basically came out and effectively said that, hey, we need to have an extension in this whole eviction moratorium, but however, we should make it a lot more targeted to areas that are obviously facing the consequences in a significant capacity of the Delta variant. Come around a few hours later, the CDC basically imposed an extension to the eviction moratorium, or a resurrection to the eviction moratorium, from August 3rd, 2021, all the way through October 3rd, 2021. So this CDC order that was basically issued is what I want to talk about in this video. I want to talk about is what is actually in that order, what are some of these areas that are basically being defined as areas of high risk and where this order is actually applicable, what the impact of this is going to be all the way from the tenants to the landlords and all the way to the court system, and we'll also spend a few minutes just talking about what's going to be next, or what's potentially going to be next when it comes to this whole saga. Before I get too far into it, I do lots of videos on personal finance, which includes investing as well as real estate. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're one of my existing viewers, hello. And don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell, and let's get into it. So what's in this order itself? So the order in itself is about 19 pages long, and most of it is filled with bureaucratic drivel, and is, of course, most of it is also a copy and paste from the prior eviction moratorium, though it did have some incremental nuggets that were basically added to it as well. There is some incremental information, for example, the Delta variant. There is some level of incremental information on the efficacy of the vaccination and how more and more people should go about getting it, and there is some more information in here about some real data as it relates to the contagion that is the Delta variant and how it basically transmits a lot more significantly, particularly in shared houses housing, or perhaps amongst the homeless as well. Now, the key thing in the order, though, as I mentioned earlier, is that it is intended to target some of the most focused or hard-hit areas of the country that is applicable to this whole Delta variant. It's not some level of a generic order that is basically all-encompassing or taking over the entire country. That is like a key portion of this particular eviction order. The order specifically states this order applies in U.S. counties experiencing substantial and high levels of community transmission levels of SARS-CoV-2 as defined by CDC as of August 3rd, 2021. If a U.S. county that is not covered by this order as of August 3rd, 2021 later experiences substantial or high levels of community transmission, which in the order is in effect, then the county will become subject to this order as of the date the county begins experiencing substantial or high levels of community transmission. So at face value, this sounds great. It sounds like the CDC has put a lot of thought in terms of which specific areas that they're going to target and is going to be applicable to this eviction moratorium going all the way through October 3rd, 2021. But if that is your fundamental notion, you would be wrong. And here is the reason why. So look at this. This is the map, okay? This is the map that basically talks about these high-level areas of substantial or high levels of community spread of this particular Delta variant or of SARS-CoV-2 just in general, okay? And as you can see, any area with this kind of like reddish color is basically areas where this whole eviction moratorium more or less is applicable. So as you can tell, it covers pretty much the entirety of the country, or it pretty much covers every single population base of the country, and for all intents and purposes is taking into account about 70 to 80% of the population of the country. So to basically think that, hey, this thing is more targeted, perhaps is more applicable to certain states where perhaps the vaccination rates were significantly lower, would be an incorrect assumption, okay? So what is the impact of this? What is the impact of this to the tenants as well as landlords as well as the court system? So let's get into that next. Well, the set of the population that is going to lose the most when it comes to this whole thing continues to be the mom and pop landlords. I've covered off on that in other videos. I'll include a link to that up in the description above as well as in the description below. But with that said, these mom and pop landlords are going to continue to be significantly impacted because while the federal government has appropriated some $47 billion to make up for all of this back rent which these landlords are basically having to deal with while continuing to cover off on their mortgage, their insurance, their taxes, and of course keeping the property ready and available for these renters, the problem is that to access any level of these funds, it requires the cooperation of these renters, okay? The landlords cannot just apply for it. They need the tenants to basically drive the entirety of the process. And this becomes a problem because the tenants do not in all instances view this particular thing as their own issue. They view this as a landlord issue. And even if these mom and pops are able to effectively get these tenants to basically cooperate, which for all intents and purposes is going to be a tall order because as I mentioned on July 31st, the eviction moratorium ended and there was this period to August 3rd, 2021 when this new eviction moratorium was basically put in place. So lots of landlords would basically have acted on and try to get some level of filings done with the states in order to get a lot of the eviction processes underway. So the tenants already know that this whole fact pattern is coming and the level of cooperation with the landlord is basically going to come significantly down as well. And states, even if you can get these guys, these tenants to basically cooperate with the landlords and to help drive the process forward, the states are not making it easy at all, okay? So as I was researching this video, I basically decided to go onto the Illinois site, okay, the IHDA site, which is the Illinois Housing Development Authority site, to just kind of understand what the process would be for a tenant to basically start the process such that they can get access to some of this federal funds. And what I found from the website was not positive. This, for example, is what you are going to see on that landing page for the IHDA website. The tenant-led application period for the Illinois Rental Payment Program is now closed for new applications until further notice. All joint applications completed by both the tenant and the landlord are currently being evaluated for funding by IHDA. And the IHDA will basically contact all applicants upon completion of the review. Applications initiated by tenants prior to Sunday, July 18th will remain accessible to landlords and may be completed proceeded until 11:59 on August 15th. So I wonder what some of the senators that have been, stomping the hill here are going to be thinking about this, and perhaps there is a way that you can help in terms of driving this message all the way up the chain, and that is by smashing that like button for the YouTube algorithm, so this video gets pumped out and some of these high-level congressmen and women basically get line of sight into how bleak some of the environment is in a lot of these states. Then there is the issue with the courts, right? So one of the big things that was basically happening during that July 31st to August 3rd period is the courts were basically being told or educated on that, hey, they should push forward for mediation as opposed to pure play eviction. And this is going to be less than desirable for landlords to hear as well, because it certainly seems that all the chips are basically pointing against these landlords, okay? So when they're pushing for mediation, it basically makes evicting these tenants almost basically untenable. Now, the courts do effectively realize that at a certain point, it is going to get to critical mass, and there is going to be a whole riff in terms of this whole evictions process that needs to get processed through the system. But for all intents and purposes, these courts at this point in time are basically being trained and are being educated on the need to move towards mediation as well as opposed to eviction. So what's next in this whole saga? So as I mentioned in the earlier part of this video, the Supreme Court already ruled this whole CDC eviction moratorium to be unconstitutional. And since Congress has not passed any legislation or any law that would effectively change the position of the Supreme Court, for all intents and purposes, even this eviction moratorium resurrection is basically going to be viewed as unconstitutional as well, okay? So this, for all intents and purposes, is just a stall tactic. It's a stall tactic because by the time the Supreme Court hears the case presented by the landlords, because that's who's going to bring this up again, it's going to get to October by that point in time. So effectively, these renters have basically bought themselves another 2 months of free rent. But perhaps over the next 2 months, maybe the states will figure out their act and basically be able to distribute more of these federally allocated funds. Maybe some of that may transpire. Maybe some of these landlords may be able to communicate with their tenants to effectively help drive the process such that these landlords can be made whole when it comes to back rent. So what are your thoughts as it relates to this whole thing? Do you think that this whole eviction moratorium extension or resurrection is fair or unfair? Who do you think is going to be most hard hit by it? Include all of your thoughts in the comments below, as I'm sure it'll be making for a pretty entertaining reading when it comes to the community as a whole. I hope you found value to this video, and if you did, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and I'll of course see you in the next one.